Today on Meanbrews, we're covering Wheatwine and a little bit of an update on where I've been. If you haven't checked it out, I did present on American Porter at the HomebrewCon this year. You can check out that audio and that presentation on the AHA website. Unfortunately, I'm not going to share it on here. It's property of the AHA now. Go check it out. I found 99 porter recipes, so it's a pretty substantial data set. Let's get right into the wheat wine. I was able to find 20 wheat wine recipes. 0 were best of show. We had no best of shows, 12 gold, 7 silver, and 1 bronze. The date distribution, we had a couple recipes in 2008, then a big gap, and then we had quite a few since 2016 that have won medals. The BJCP description is 22D, a richly textured, high alcohol sipping beer with a significant grainy, bready flavor and a sleek body that the emphasis is first on the bready, weedy flavors with malt, hops, fruity yeast, and alcohol complexity. When I look at the stability and the variation between recipes, it's a young style, not a lot of data on it, recently added to BJCP. So there is a lot of variation as we settle into the norms of what this style is. The original gravity ranged between 1.080, bottom end of BJCP, up to 1.133, somewhere around there. The mean was right on the mid-range of the BJCP of 1.100. My recipe will be a little bit under because we're seeing a slight trend with a moderately significant Pearson's coefficient here, showing that going down to the 1.09, high 1.090s, somewhere in that realm. Final gravity, anywhere between 1.012 to 1.047. That's a sweet beer. Again, the mean is right in the mid-range of 1.022. I'm going to be on the bottom end of that because of the yeast I'm selecting and the mash profile I'm using. IBUs anywhere between 16 and 94, with the average at 51. I will be right at 45 because we are seeing pretty strong correlation of reduction of IBUs over time to right around 45. We're also seeing a reduction in the BUG ratio, and I think mine is at 0.45, somewhere around there, right there where the trends are showing us. Color range, a pretty narrow range for BJCP, but we had one recipe out here at 40. The average was 14 or 27 EBC. I'm going to be right at 12. When I took out that 40 in the low, we're showing that 12 to 13 is somewhere in the sweet spot for this style. The malt percentages, 85% base malt was the average. Next most prominent crystal at 5.7, toasted malts at 4.5, and adjuncts at 4.4. Looking at the distribution of malts, base malts, we had anything between 67 and 97% of the grist. Average was 85, and that's where I will be with my recipe, 85%. Zooming in on the specialty malts, next most prominent was toast malts. 9 out of 10 recipes used a toasted malt at an average of about 5% of the grist. 80% used a crystal malt at 7%, and about a little less than half used adjuncts at between 9 and 10% of the grist. I'll be using toasted malts right at the average, 4.5. A little bit under the average on crystal at about 5-6% of the grist, and then adjuncts right at about 5% as well. For the base malts that were used for this style, wheat, it's a wheat beer, so 100% of the recipes, all the recipes used wheat at an average of about 55-56% of the grist. Next most prominent is two-row or Golden Promise or Maris Otter. We had about 65% of the recipes use those at about 20 to 25% of the grist. Then we had Pilsner, Vienna, Munich, and Red X used in some of the other recipes in lower proportions. I'll be using wheat malt right at the average, 56, I think, percent of the grist. And then I'll be using a two-row. And the reason why I selected a two-row and I omitted the Pilsner was I wanted that diastatic power, and two-row has a higher diastatic power than Pilsner malt. So 20% of the grist, around 20% is two-row. Oh, and then we'll be using Vienna, right at 10% of the grist Vienna malts, and the reason is a higher usage of Vienna in later styles, 100% in some of the later recipes using Vienna, so I elected to use that as well. Crystal malt's most prominent. 40% of the recipes used a light crystal, 10 to 40. Right under that at 35 used a medium crystal or Cara Munich. And then we had caramel wheat, Cara Pils, and crystal or dark crystal in very few recipes here. I'll be using right around a low amount of medium or light crystal, and then medium crystal, even lower amount to give me that percentage that I'm looking for in the grain bill. So a mix of these two. Toasted malts, this was kind of surprising, but a very high proportion, almost 2/3 of the recipes used a honey malt at about 4 to 5% of the grist. And then some others used melanoid, aromatic, and biscuit or victory malts in lower proportions. I'll be using honey malt right at the mean. I think it's 4.5, somewhere around there. Adjuncts, the most prominent is sucrose. A quarter of the recipes used cane sugar at 5% of the grist. Others used, we had a couple flaked malts, flaked wheat, flaked oats, honey, dextrose, and then some spices here that I included as well. I will be using sucrose or cane sugar right at the average here. For the bittering hops, we had 11 different bittering hops. The most prominent is Magnum. 45% of the recipes use Magnum. The rest are a mix of American and European continental hops. I'll be using Magnum for this recipe. Flavor hops, we had 12 different flavor hops used. Nelson, Laurel, Simcoe, Tet, Howler. Good mix of, again, American and Amarillo, sorry. Good mix of American and continental European hops. Also some New Zealand hops. I'm going to use Nelson for this. Could go either way, fruity or noble. I decided to go fruity. Aroma hops, we had 13 different aroma hops. Again, a good mix of the same two styles. I'm going to stick with the New Zealand, Australian hops and go with Motueka here as hop additions. A big range here on flavor and aroma. Pretty big sweep. But we'll start with the flavor hops. Almost 2/3 of the recipes use the flavor hop at an average of 0.2 to 0.25 ounces per gallon. That's 1 to 1 1/4 ounce in a 5-gallon batch. More recipes used aroma hop, 80% at 0.3. That's a bit more, 1.5 ounces in a 5-gallon batch. I'll be using just under on the flavor and on the mean for the aroma hops. We are seeing a decrease in the rate, hop rate for flavor hops over time. So my recipe is aligning with that. We are seeing an increase in the number of recipes that use aroma hops from 80% previously to they're used in all of them here. So definitely use an aroma hop for this style. Mash types, not surprisingly with a large amount of wheat malt used here. Lots of step mashes. 65% of the recipes use a step mash, and I will incorporate that as well. Here are the different steps that they've done. Over here on the left, we have an acid rest anywhere between 104 and 115 with an average of 107. Protein rest from 122 to 136 with an average of 128. 60% of the recipes did a protein rest. With that much wheat, that makes sense. More than enough did a beta and an alpha rest for me to use in my recipe. 146 to 150 for beta, and 148 to 159 for alpha with an average of 155. I'll be doing a higher end for the protein rest, 132, and then right on the averages for the beta and alpha rest. I'm skipping the acid rest here. The reason why I'm increasing the temperature on the protein rest we're just seeing a big correlation here, strong correlation. The Pearson's coefficient of 0.86 showing an increase in the temperature of the protein rest over time. Boil duration anywhere between 60 and 150 with an average of 84 minutes. And I'm going to go with a 90-minute. I think I'm going to need at least a 90-minute boil to get that gravity for this beer. I'm expecting to pull a large volume during my sparge to be able to get to the numbers I want to hit. The yeast used were pretty much English or American strains. Chico, the most prominent, 45% of the recipes, followed by the Whitbread strain. And we had this Orval over here. Eric, thanks for that. He said he wouldn't recommend using it again. And then some other British or American strains as well. I'm going to stick with Chico, and the data is really showing that is trending up as well. More and more recipes using the Chico strain. Water chemistry, lots of recipes with water chemistry, so feel pretty good about reporting this. 81 calcium, 10 magnesium, 18 sodium, 110 sulfate, and 75 chlorides. My recipe is going to be on the numbers with everything except chlorides, where I'm going to be high. I'm going to be right at 110, balanced with almost a 1-to-1 ratio with the sulfates. And the reason is we're seeing that increase as well. So good correlation here, 90.91, showing increase in chlorides for this style. Fermentation temperatures anywhere between 60 and 74. Looking specifically, the average was 66, I believe. Didn't put it on there. 66, same for the Chico strain, smaller range, but right there at 66 seems to be the sweet spot, and there's no evolution going on here with the fermentation temperatures. Carbonation volumes, average was 2.3, and the mash pH average was 5.4. However, strangely enough, I'm seeing an increase in the mash pHs over time to about 5.5, which I'll reflect with my recipe. Probably the lesser and lesser acid rests being performed, causing this to go up a bit. All right, now for the Meanbrews recipe, just recapping what we went over. 50% of the grist is wheat malt, about 20% two-row, 10% Vienna. Those are the base malts. Toasted malt, 4.5% honey malt. Adjuncts, 4.4% sucrose. And then my split here between Crystal 40 or Caramel 40 and Caramel 60 for my crystal malts. I'm going to hop with, again, Magnum, 29, 30 IBUs at 60 minutes. And then I'm going to finish with Nelson at 15 at about 0.15 ounce per gallon or 1.12 grams per liter. And then, I missed the Motueka there, 0.3 ounce per gallon or 2.24 Motueka flame out. And then use your favorite West Coast yeast. These are all very similar genetically, not identical, but very similar flavor profiles between these four. You can use USO5 as well if you'd like. Original gravity 1.097 with 45 IBUs. Water chemistry, again, reflecting that balanced profile here we just talked about. Mash pH 5.5, so add your favorite. You're going to need a mash acid here, so make sure you hit that 5.5 and don't start pulling from the few husks that you have in there, some of the grainy, husky, astringent flavors. You may need rice hulls here. With this amount of wheat, you're probably going to need some rice hulls to help with lautering. I'm going to do a step mash, 132 for 15, 147 for 45, and 155 for 45 as well. Mash out and sparge it as you normally would, and boil it for at least 90 minutes until you hit your gravity. Chill to 65 Fahrenheit and pitch. I'm going to do a 3-liter starter for this 5-gallon batch. Fermented at 66 for 7 days until it starts to slow. Then raise it up to 70 and hold that for another 7 days or longer. Probably could hold it longer just to make sure it cleans up everything. It's a big beer, so make sure it cleans it up. And then bottle or keg to 2.3 volumes of CO2. And that's it for today. Next style, I'm going to go back to my Patreon and have those guys select which style they'd like me to cover next, and try to be a little bit more prompt with the next video. So look out for the future, and I'll see you in hopefully a couple weeks. Bye-bye.